It's the same one from the present year.
Sorry, not kidding. Oh, yeah, I want to get it back. Charge your battery life.
That one, I am his boss. It's just my.
But I will tell.
My employees looking at
I will tell.
So.
Lala was sweet today. We got a lot.
Well, sewer.
You know, the girl that was over there in La La Land.
Yeah.
No, you know, in the Hispanic community, there's always a lot of lalas in the hood, you know, so if you don't have a lala, you're not a legitimate. And Lavo, you can't forget Lavo.
And she always wears it.
Oh, should I put this back over there? Or maybe we can vote.
You can both.
Okay. Yeah.
That also means I think it's changed the page.
Well, sure, try to. That's okay. Yeah. Testing.
I fell in love with a girl.
Big old giant red lips.
Thank you. Have the name.
Yeah. They were like. It's not special revenue. It's not part of general.
Let your wife know about it. No, it wasn't you, it was Lala. Oh, my God. Do I have anything to go by here? Pretty bad.
Yeah, yeah.
This is it, this little sheet paper,
No, the other one.
this 3 sheet.
Yep.
Or the one you have.
So you're.
Yeah, mayor's script's right there.
There, where did you go? Oh, did that part? Oh, wow, that changes. Now? Hey. Oh, you know what it is? We don't have it together yet. Good afternoon. I would like to call the May 24th, 2023 special council meeting to order. I would like to point out that this meeting is being hosted through a live stream on the city's website and by Zoom teleconference. I would like to remind council to have their microphones turned on and positioned so the audience can hear you. City Clerk, may we have roll call, please?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Krupa.
Here.
Councilmember Peterson.
Here.
Mayor Protem Lowenthal. Here. Mayor Mills.
Here.
All members are present.
Okay, we're gonna have an invocation, but I don't know by who. Who? Ann? Okay, we'll have an invocation by Ann Smith, our friendly neighborhood rider. Be careful with her. No, I'm just kidding. You'll please stand.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Heavenly Father, just thank you for this opportunity to come together as a group, to work together, to solve some of the problems of the city. Lord, I just ask you to be present in the conversations, in the comments, and in the opinions, including my own. I want to thank you, Father, for the people that have stood up to represent us. I know they do their very best, and I pray that you continue to keep a hedge of protection, not only around the city council and to members of the community, but around all of the folks that are here in this particular meeting. I thank you for the First Amendment rights that we have, Lord, and I thank you for all the other freedoms that we enjoy. And I'm fully expectant that the problems will come to some sort of resolution. And I do all of this in the name of Jesus.
Thank you, Ann. Mayor Pro Tem Lilienthal, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for God. There is a 3-minute per person time limit for all general public comments on non-public hearing items. All who wish to speak, including council members and staff, need to be recognized by the mayor before speaking. For those that wish to join by Zoom, you will be asked to raise your hand if you would like to speak. Please state your name and item you are commenting on before speaking. We'll take public comments for items listed on the agenda. Ann Smith. You have 3 minutes, Ann.
Okay, Mayor, City Council, City Manager, and I guess we have somebody different for our City Attorney and City Clerk. My name is Ann Smith and I live in the city of Hemet. My comment is that this budget is so upside down that even if you did shut down a fire station, which I know you won't, you'll still be very short. Wait until the SAFER grant expires and watch the pain then, because you weren't given all the facts on that grant and it's going to hurt like mad. Lots of stuff that were not covered in the discussion. You were basically lied to when you were told it wouldn't cost the city a dime. You're in a really tough spot, guys. And what I'm afraid of is that Hemet will once again wind up on the California watch list, and the state may very well come in to take care of business. I really hope I'm wrong. And if it turns out I'm wrong, I'll just have to do a huge mea culpa. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. We will take public comments for items listed on the agenda from any Zoom members. Will you please raise your hand if you wish to speak?
Mayor, there are no Zoom participants.
Next, we will move on to the budget workshop. Our first discussion item is fiscal year 2023 to 2024 budget workshop. Does staff have any report on this item? Oh, yes.
Thank you, Mayor, and good afternoon, council members and citizens. I'm Mark Prestwich. I'm the city manager. And today we are going to conduct our first budget workshop for the 23-24 fiscal year. Before I get started, I want to take a moment to say thank you to our staff. First, our departments for their work in producing budget preparation documents. And second, for our finance team, and namely that's Paul Espinoza, our interim finance director. And we've been working with Paul to develop this budget as well as his finance team. So Tiffany Barnett has also been very helpful in crafting this budget. So our department directors are here as well for questions that you may have as we walk through the budget. We're going to stay fairly high level today and talk to you about first some financial trends of the budget and observations of the budget that I have as kind of an independent looking at this budget and seeing it in play for the first time. I'm going to also control the slides here. So we're going to move to the second slide, and this document is published on the website so people can follow as well. The budget is really a document that reflects your priorities. And of course, we want to make sure that there's a strong nexus between the budget that develops as well as its integration with a strategic plan. And we have yet to have a workshop on our strategic plan, but we have a number of 2023-24 initiatives that we'll be meeting to talk about in a workshop in the very near future. And the work that has been done in accordance with the vision that the council has established for the strategic plan. So today, I mentioned we're going to look at some financial trends over time. And there's good news to report on that front, a lot of good news that we're going to talk about. We're also going to talk about some budget development principles that guided the work as we put together estimates for you and began to craft a draft budget. And we've worked on developing a budget that continues to support the investments made over the years with the Measure U resources, as well as be careful about how we're investing so that it's generating for the city an environment where it will entice in development and encourage investment. We're going to discuss some key cost drivers that affect the 23-24 budget. And we want to receive your feedback on the information that you received today. And we'll talk more about that at the end. Let's start with key revenue trends. And obviously the trajectory is positive here. What you see in 2018 is a significant increase in the revenue, and that reflects the passage of Measure U. And Measure U has been a tremendous value to the city. We're going to really drill down on the orange bars here in this chart. The orange reflect the sales tax performance. So essentially our sales tax, Measure U adds almost essentially double the revenue that we previously were receiving. And when you look back at 2010, the city's budget, general fund revenue from these sources was about $20 million. And today it's $60 million. So it's a threefold increase over just over 12 years, a very significant development. But we're gonna focus on the next slide on the orange bars here and drill down on those a bit. So you see both a table as well as a chart. And what this shows is the performance of the sales tax. And Hemet is a city that is overly dependent on sales tax in contrast to other cities. I've worked for cities that have lots of different, I guess, some have been well balanced between hotel tax, property tax, which is quite stable, and sales tax. But sales tax and hotel tax are generally quite volatile, especially during economic downturns. And so a significant portion of our revenue is derived from the Hemet Auto Mall. Our economy, the core driver of our economy is selling cars at the Hemet Auto Mall. It's a significant contributor to our revenue. And with Measure U, it adds that much more revenue to the city. So we're grateful for the fact that the mall is there today, and every effort we can do to help support car sales, vehicle sales at the facility will generate revenue for the city. So it's a very important revenue source. The passage of Measure U occurred in November of 2016, and beginning in the 17-18 year, that's where you see the real growth. And the performance between, I think it's 19 and 20 on this slide. I'll have to put my glasses on to read the finer details, but the performance has been very good over the last couple of years. I do want to point out that when you look at the end of the chart here, when we start to look at the forecast for 2014, the numbers are beginning to change. So we use a very well-respected sales tax advisor. When we look at developing the budget, we rely on them to help us with numbers. And the numbers they gave us in January were about $1.3 million higher than the numbers they recently shared with us. What that essentially translates to is they're building in an economic slowdown for cities over the next 12 months. And they analyze revenue city by city. So they've taken a careful look at the performance of our retailers, and they're building in a slowdown. So what that means for us is we adopt next year's budget. It's going to be critical that we pay attention to the sales tax performance, particularly in the first 3 months, because it may trend lower than the forecast that they've presented to us, which we've relied upon partly in developing the budget estimates. So because it's such a volatile revenue source during the good times, it has a very large upside. But during the downtimes, if we're not producing those sales, we're going to feel the effects of that more than some other cities. Our property tax is going to be a more stable revenue. And at this point, we have an opportunity with the hotel tax. There's more opportunity down the road as we see new hotels come online. Are there any questions about the history of the sales tax performance? I'm going to probably pause and ask you for questions if you have them as we move from slide to slide. The next slide relates to the resolution that implemented Measure U. So when Measure U was passed in November of 16, when the council placed that on the ballot, probably in the July-August 16 timeframe, shortly thereafter, the council adopted a resolution that said we would, if passed, we recommend that the city invests dollars in this way. And what the resolution said was, on the existing general fund, which you think of it as the left side of this chart, that's the framework for the general fund revenue that's not related to Measure U. The resolution implements use of that revenue in a way to support the maintenance of effort, the maintenance of the investment made before that election, so that 72% of that money would continue to sustain the city's investment in public safety. And that breaks down into two different columns. One is police, which would receive 2/3 of the 72%, and fire, which would receive 1/3 of the 72%. The 28% that's non-public safety, that's your library, that's your city hall, consisting of finance, planning, city clerk, city administration, even the city council's budget, and the library all fall under the 28%. With Measure U, when it was adopted on the right side of this breakdown, and what we see at the top, I should start at the top, we're projecting revenues of $69.5 million next year. That's the current draft estimate of revenue, all of our revenues together. So 52 million is related to the pre-Measure U configuration of the sources of revenue. And Measure U, a 1% sales tax, is estimated to generate $16.8 million next year. Now that's pretty close to what the performance is going to be this year. That's just another indicator of the revenue is sort of flattening for now, and we hope that it will grow down the road again. And I always like outperforming expectations anyway, so let's see if we can grow it a lot higher than 16.8. But the way that the council resolution authorizes use of that money is 2/3 of those resources are directed to the police department, and 1/3 of those resources are directed to the fire department. So when you add it all up today, what we're doing is we're investing we've structured a budget that invests $54.7 million in public safety and $14.7 million in the non-public safety departments. Are there any questions about this chart?
You're telling me that 21% goes to city only, or employees in the streets and everything else that we have to deal with? Just 21%, which equates to what, $14 million?
Right. So this is the library, this is City
Oh,
Hall and the library,
everything.
essentially.
Everything other than
Right.
first responders,
Right.
21%.
Correct.
Oh, thank you.
So we'll move on. This is the aggregate performance of the general fund revenue from 2013 forward. I'm going to ask Paul to elaborate on the last 2 years here. You see a large gray box that showed up, that mystery revenue. It's really not a mystery, but we're going to have Paul explain that for you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. So if you look at the last two columns, you're going to see they're relatively close in size. However, our blue revenue, or our tax revenue, seems to be somewhat lower, and our gray seems to be somewhat thicker. The gray is considered intergovernmental revenue. 2 years ago, our auditors had a finding, and that finding was that we had to book our revenues in this category differently. It's more of a change in accounting principle than a reflection of a different kind of revenue. So the auditors have recommended this change. We've made it. Overall, if you were to look at your blue and your gray, both of those colors combined, you'll see that the revenue is is the same. But based on an auditor finding and how we had to do a change in accounting method, we now have to report that as an intergovernmental. For the most part, at the end of the day, it's really the same dollar. Boss.
Any questions on Paul's comments?
Yes. I may. Is that the change just in taking the VLF, vehicle in lieu fees and putting it into a different category?
Exactly what it is.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman.
One question from prior, city manager. Does that include all employee salaries on that 21%? Does that mean, is that?
Point of clarification, that it does include employee salaries that are non-safety and employee salaries that are paid from non-general fund. For example, we have a pretty healthy water fund. Water fund's not general fund. So this does represent general fund employees who are non-safety. Sir.
Okay, I'm gonna have Paul run the next slide, and then we'll come back to me on the following slide. But some of the slides are visual representations of the charts, and this is one of those examples.
Who doesn't like pie? This is a reflection of our estimated general fund revenues. As you can see, based on the chart, our lion's share of our revenues comes from tax, property tax and sales tax. You can see our Measure U tax is growing, as is our sales tax revenue. That's right there, half the pie. Overall, we do have some uses or some revenues from other areas, but the lion's share again is coming from Measure U, sales tax straight, and property tax. Do you have the next slide? General fund expenditures. As you can see, the cost of doing business is growing, and it's growing year after year. Our expenditures, again, the lion's share of our expenditures do make up the orange part, which is our public safety, and everything else is kind of after that. But again, this just illustrates the lion's share of our general fund expenditures are in fact safety. Next slide, Sam. You want to jump in? You want to get this?
Okay, this is a very important slide because we can see a significant change over the last 10 years. Pension obligations relate to the CalPERS supporting the pensions for the employees. OPEB is post-employment benefits, other post-employment benefits that relate to often benefits that are provided to employees post-retirement. And what we see in the chart as well as the graph is this has been trending up pretty consistently for the last 10 years. And in fact, it's more than doubled, right? The number in 2012 was about $10 million. It's north of $20 million, it's north of $21 million today. The good news is there's a bubble moving through the system. And right now we're hopeful that we're at the top of the bubble, meaning this is about as bad as it should get. There are some potential situations where it could get a little worse, and I'm going to talk about those because these have impactful these changes to CalPERS investment returns, changes to what they call the discount rate, the amount of return, the percentage of returns they expect from their investments. If they don't meet those targets, as they didn't do in the 2008-9 era when we had that deep recession, the Great Recession, CalPERS lost, I believe, close to 40% of their investment portfolio, and they had to rebuild. And essentially it's still underfunded more than they want it to be. So they're trying to catch up. But the pension obligation numbers in blue on this chart have continued to rise. And what that reflects is a group of employees that are referred to as classic employees. So these are employees hired into PERS pre-2014, essentially. And we still have a lot of them in the city. I'm one of them. But we have newer employees hired after 2014 that have a different retirement methodology. And that retirement methodology is less expensive. And it was state pension reform that led to those changes. So changes at the state level impacted all public employees. And today the city has about a mix of 60%, 40%. We have 60% PEPRA employees and 40% classic employees. So the bubble is moving through the system, and the bubble are the classic employees like myself, and public safety members as well. Both public safety and non-safety are impacting these numbers. But for several years now, CalPERS has been forecasting that the bubble will peak in the 2023 to 2025 range. We're there now. And we have a chart on the next page that is a good reference point for sort of conveying the message that I'm sending to you, which is the worst is almost over. But I do want to caution us on if CalPERS did experience some significant decline in investment returns, or they chose to change their discount rate and lower it, we're going to be asked to pick up an additional burden. And in a prior city where we had about a $20 million budget, some of the swings were in a single year as much as $4 million to the general fund. So if we extrapolate from that experience with a $69 million revenue on the general fund, we have the potential to see single year changes in the $10 million range. That's more of a worst case scenario. We're hopeful that'll never happen. I just want you to know that it's a potential, and we would have to quickly adjust if we saw things like that happening. Sure.
If I may, counsel, one of the things this does show us, though, and this is something I think is worthy of note. If you look at these bar charts and how they're growing year after year, something that I think is worthy of noting. If the city were never to give raises during this time, and I'm not suggesting that, I'm not recommending that, but I'm saying if the city did in fact just not give raises, the cost to employ and the cost to provide the same level of service year after year is increasing, whether we do anything. So it's something to note. As Mark had indicated, we are moving away from the classic dinosaur of the classic employee, no offense, and moving into the PEPRA. And the pension formula for that is significantly less than us classic guys. That said, we're going to see that incremental change over years. We're not going to see our change in our PERS costs tomorrow. It's going to take years and years and years as more of us older folks start to phase out, and the newer PEPRA employees start to phase in. Ross.
As we were developing this slide, we decided to add a column to the right of the chart there. And I want to direct your attention to the bottom 5 rows there from 21 to 24. What you'll notice is in fact, every year since 2014, this obligation, the growing annual cost to the city has been increasing. And in 21, 22, and 23, it grew by more than $1 million a year. But in 24, what we're forecasting, and this is data that PERS gives us, so these are reliable numbers, the number is half of what it was in 2023. What that hopefully signals for us is that the bubble has peaked and we're maybe starting to head down the slope. When we do, we're going to derive some annual incremental cost savings year after year as that continues to drop. So the fact that the number's half of what it was last year, that's great, because that money can be directed to services and programs for the city. If you look at the orange bars, these haven't grown as much as the blue because there's a fixed group of people. The next chart that I'm going to show you relates to the orange, not the blue, but we can derive from the orange what will happen to the blue. So I'm going to toggle over. These are the OPEB obligations of the city projected forward. This is a slide taken from the June 30th, 2022 annual comprehensive financial report. So this page is in there. What it shows is we're still pretty high for the next 5-6 years. And then we start to see a drop over time as the portfolio of employees and retirees move through the system. This is essentially the trajectory that we're going to see with the blue pension costs as well. So the good news is we're hopefully near the peak of that right now. Any questions on OPEB and pension obligations?
Just a quick question. Hopefully I can word this right without seen, people seeing me as somebody negative or anything, but on this bubble of the dinosaurs that we're talking about, is it based on the longevity of the life of that dinosaur?
Yes, it is. That's part of it's based on a number of factors, but yes, actuarial, they have assumptions built into their formulas about how long those dinosaurs are going to be around.
Okay.
And as the dinosaurs move on, then the costs get a little less.
Gotcha.
So yes, that's based partly on that. And as people live longer, CalPERS has had to take into consideration the longer lifespan of people, and so that's been a contributing factor to, and is a contributing factor to how they calculate the cost to us to help make it solvent.
Mayor, that's a great question. One of the things that we have to remember is PERS is a relatively young pension program. It started 35, 40 years ago. And at that time, if you think about it, if we're all first-year employees and it's a first-year PERS program and we're contributing 7% of our salary to our retirement, no one's retiring at the early years of PERS, right? So that pension plan is building assets. I would even say back then, it wasn't a recessional time. So their return on their plan assets was even going through the roof. I remember when I was first hired, they had pension vacations or pension holidays, which meant we as employees, hey, guess what, guys, our assets and PERS are doing so well, you don't have to make your 7% contribution this year. Yay, great news. That did happen, and I remember it. I didn't get it. I was a first-year guy, but I remember it. Here we are 35 years later. Think about it. If a new employee gets into PERS first year and 30 years later, what are the lion's share of those employees doing? They're retiring. So PERS did have an issue with the investment return on plan assets, no doubt. The recession of the housing market crash didn't help us, no doubt. People all retiring that were first in at one time really hurt us. And that's one of the things that isn't spoken about. But because of that, our plan assets were earning less because they were less. So right now, what PERS is trying to do, they finally got into a two-tier system where dinosaurs like us are getting out of the plan. And the younger, I don't know, generation of Pepper employees will now again start building into that. And if you think about Pepper employees, we just hired them a year or 2 years ago. Guess what's happening? We're starting to build up plan assets again. So, this is, I don't want to say it's cyclical because PERS again is a relatively new pension plan, but this is something we're hoping to see, and this is explaining that. Ross?
There was a time where the investment returns were so good that the $21 million that we have to invest in this next year didn't exist. So as he says, the holiday was taking that $21 million and making it zero. That was really the world back in the late 90s during the .com before it went bust, and post the retirement enhancement agreements that happened in the late 90s and early 2000s. This is the expense side of the general fund. So this is a visual representation of appropriations by department. And again, this reflects the chart that we saw early, the graph that we saw earlier, indicating the distribution of the city's revenues. And we'll see a breakdown of this in an actual spreadsheet in a second. So this is the revenue that we project. We showed both the amended numbers from 2023 as well as an updated estimate. So when you adopted your budget last year, I think you were in the $63 million range. The amended budget was $63.9. Our estimate of the actual revenues is going to be $68.9 million. So the performance has been outstanding. And you can see here where property tax and sales tax both outperformed estimates along with the VLF numbers. These are vehicle license fee numbers. So all of the top 5 revenue line items, 4 line items here, outperformed even the amended budget. So that's a lot of what's contributing to the recent performance of the budget. And if you look at the next column, we're actually pulling back on the sales tax a little bit based on the forecasting that's been provided to us. And on both the regular sales tax and the Measure U sales tax, property taxes typically continue to grow. If there's a recession, often there's a lag of about 2 years that will show up before we see that number potentially either soften or go down. But with the appreciation of homes in California and Prop 13, we typically see this grow by at least 2% a year in any given city. And we've enjoyed good performance on that front recently. And I think there's a lot of upside on seeing our properties grow in value in Hemet. So this is a nice summary. It does net to about 8% growth on the revenue between the amended budget and the current estimated revenues. Any questions on this number?
Got a question. I don't understand what the use of money and property is. This,
Use of money and property has to do with some of our investments, some of our money that we invest and we get a return on. Property is some of the land that we lease and that we earn money on. So the category for use of property money isn't that high of a category because we don't have much of that. But that's what makes up that category.
okay, thank you. Yes. She was asking. Go ahead.
We're gonna
Go ahead.
battle.
go first.
Thank you, Malcolm. Could you just give a brief explanation on what encompasses franchise fees and also the license and permit fees?
Absolutely. Businesses that operate in this city, be it a utility, a cable company, a telephone company, waste haulers, they have to, per city ordinance or city policy, they have to pay a franchise fee to operate in our city. That franchise fee comes to the city in the form of a general fund revenue. So that is their cost to work within the city. License and permits has to do with city licenses and permits. If you want to open up a barbershop, a hair salon, you've got to come in and apply for a business license. If I'm a homeowner in the city and I want to add on to a house, I have to come in and I have to get a permit. We have to go out and do an inspection to make sure that everything is up to code. If I'm a developer and I want to come in and build a development project of homes, you can see where that permit fee would be significant. So that's what encompasses a lion's share of our permit and licenses fees.
Okay, but we have business licenses broken out as a separate line item.
Right.
So what would be,
That would be a business license.
so then what would be included in the license and permit line as far as licenses?
That's a good question. You know what, Councilwoman Krupa, let me look into that. I should know that. And right now I'm having a blank, but I will look into that.
Thank you.
Where are we at? On
License and permits.
license?
The
and
difference between license and the license on that line.
permit? Starts with an L, the other with a P.
You know what, Mayor and Council, let me look into that. I'll get right back to you.
All right,
Be all right.
thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Malcolm. Malcolm had a question.
We'll have
Could
that
you give
answer before the end of the hour.
Could you give a couple examples of the intergovernmental / other?
Okay, I'm going to have Paul explain the intergovernmental once he's back. You may have had a specific question about also on the prior slide. Oops. No, I'm going the wrong direction. Sorry. Nope. Okay, I was going to look at the 68,000 on use of money. I would like to know the impact or the why that number is forecasted to be slightly lower, so we can help explain those.
Let me answer the first question. There was a time in the city where we would issue animal licenses and bicycle licenses. I don't think we do that anymore or that much. We may need to go into this resource category and change the title. So yes, ma'am, that was a great question. Thank you. The use of property and money, the $68,000 that shows a decrease. We typically don't, well, it's been a past practice of this city when doing the budget not to project an investment return on our cash. And I didn't quite understand it at the time, but I understand it now. Years ago, the last few years, as we all have experienced, markets have nosedived and crashed, and we haven't been receiving much money, if any, on our investments. I mean, there was a time I remember when our LAIF investments were coming in, I don't know, less than 1% at one time. I can see where the practice got where, well, why even budget it? You know, let's just budget it 0, and whatever we get, we get. So that's why we budget for 0. When we did our 22-23 estimate and we looked at that, you know, now it's safe to say, well, we've already collected it. We know what we're going to get for the current year. So we went ahead and booked that and presented it as an estimate because we know for sure we've collected most of it. But again, with the 23-24, we're going to project it and hold it at 0, only because these are uncertain times and it's been a past practice. Now that we're coming out of this recession, and I hope we're not heading into another one, perhaps we can go back to that and revisit that practice and start projecting a revenue source. But you can understand why in the past few years we haven't. And that's what would be driving that number. Intergovernmental revenue, that increase has to do with, oh, of course, the estimate we're receiving for the current year, the $8.4 million, we have a really good idea of what that number is going to be. Intergovernmental other. You know, let me look into that and I'll get back to you. Let me go talk to my budget guru and get to, right now I'm having a blank. I'll look into that.
Brought the budget office with us, so we'll be fine. Any other questions on this chart?
Asking a question up. Why would the franchise fees go down by what, 9.7%? Shouldn't they be going up? I just don't understand why it would go down.
Yeah, these numbers have actually been pretty flat, and it relates to the way the initial agreement was entered into with CR&R. There was a large upfront payment, but let's see if we can get some finer detail on that point.
While we're waiting, sir? Oh, too late. Forget it.
Okay, so in addition to that, there's a question on, remind me the issue. Remind me what the issue was.
Oh, franchise fees. Is
Oh, the
that
franchise
income
fees,
going out or coming in?
profit.
Is that coming in? Okay. I don't understand why it's negative.
This one I'm gonna take a guess at. I'd have to go look that up, but I do know that we've had some businesses that have left town and gone belly up. I don't know if this relates to that. I believe we've had some cable companies that have folded up shop and that aren't working, but this is a guess. I'm just going off memory. But I believe when they do that, we lose that franchise fee, that agreement. So, but I'd have to look into that. And again, right now I don't know. If I can speak to the other intergovernmental on that one, we're showing a change as a slight, we're showing an increase on that one, correct? Yes, we are. That has to do primarily with I believe that's where we book our mutual aid. And then this last year, I guess we're projecting that number to change based on actuals, but we're looking at that number coming in about 9. Last year's was lower. And I guess we're projecting that number to increase.
What's feeding that number?
Our mutual aid, that has to do with our safety, predominantly fire, going and assisting other cities as they need. And when we do that, we get to bill them for it. Last year, we had a lot of fires. I guess our estimate based on historical values is going up.
Any other questions before we move to the next slide?
This is an exhaustive, this is all where we get all our money from.
This is the full 69 million, right? And the big tickets are at the top.
Chief Boots just reminded me, and I was drawing a blank. I'm sorry. It's a lot to retain. Our intergovernmental and other has to do with our SROs. Apparently, we have a contract with the school district. That number has gone up. Boss, is about right? So for 2 more additional school resource officers. Yeah. So sorry, I had that one wrong.
Okay, so this is an important slide for us to break down because I think this is where we can end up with potentially some questions, and I want to walk through this. So the 69 million that we just saw on the prior slide is in the upper right corner here. That's the revenue that we are projecting for 23-24. And the uses, that 77 million, it includes $8 million of one-time investments. They're discretionary investments. And we've built this budget in a sustainable way where the ongoing recurring charges only total in the $69 million range. But we are recommending, and we'll walk through all of the one-time recommended investments with you on the next 2 pages. Some of those are funded out of the general fund reserve. Others are funded out of the Measure U reserve dollars. We're going to walk line item by line item through all of those. But this is a $69 million revenue with $69 million of recurring expenses, married with $8 million of one-time uses that we'll break down in the next 2 slides. And Paul, did you want to also comment on that?
When you look at the slide by itself, and if you don't have the background or the slides before this or after this, the first thought someone would have for the 23-24 year is, wow, we have a budget deficit of $8 million, $8.1 million. But Mark and I went over back and forth on how to present this. And my idea was leave it as it is, because it allows us an opportunity to explain it. We all know what a structural deficit is, but for those that don't, I'm going to go ahead and bore you and walk you through it. A structural deficit, a structural balanced budget is a budget where your ongoing operating revenues meet or exceed your ongoing operating expenditures. Okay, that's the sustainability that Mark was just referring to. With respect to the 23-24 recommended budget, we do have a sustainable budget. We don't have a structural deficit. A structural deficit is defined as having ongoing expenditures that exceed ongoing revenues. That's not what we have here. Over the past years, we have been building up our general fund balance. Right now, we're sitting north of $50 million. We have a very robust general fund balance. What we're recommending, yes, sir.
Can you talk about how we have a robust general?
We're going to get to that. And I don't want to deflect that. I want to land the plane right now. But what we're doing, because we've been building up our general fund revenues over the years, and there's several reasons for that, Mark's going to get into that. But given that we've done that, what we're looking at doing is using some of our built up reserves for one-time expenditures for infrastructure. That's one of the purposes you use reserves, one of the many. But we have an opportunity right now to address some infrastructure in the city that is desperately needed. And that's what we're planning on doing today. That's what we're recommending to you today. So again, it's not a structural deficit. Our budget, operating budget, is balanced. Boss?
So before we leave this chart, I also want to direct our attention to the left 2 columns. So what we have here is the FY 22-23 amended budget. So projected revenue of 63.9, which is actually going to look more like 69 million, and estimated planned expenditures of 72, which due to vacancies largely is projected to come in at 60 million. When you back out the continuing appropriations, that leaves us a projected surplus for the current fiscal year of $2.7 million. That number is not locked in. That's a recent estimate. Those numbers they're still gonna adjust between today and the end of the fiscal year on June 30th. So when the interim finance director indicated we have a general fund surplus, when we marry everything together, the Measure U and the general fund together, that number is in excess of $54 million today. That $54 million is going to grow to 56.7 ballpark is our estimate right now on June 30th of 2023. So that while the economic performance from a surplus standpoint is not growing, the surplus is not going to be growing at the same pace. It's softening a little bit. We're still north of $2 million, projecting a surplus of north of $2 million. So that's very good when we contrast ourselves to a lot of other cities. Not everyone has the luxury of seeing an annual surplus of that amount of money. So we're going to break down the $8 million. And it breaks down into two columns. Think of this as column one. This is the general fund reserves. And what I asked our finance staff to do is add a little reference to the beginning fund balance. The FB refers to fund balance. And then these FY 23-24 uses, these are recommended investments. We're not making any final decisions today. So this is an opportunity for us to receive some feedback on the recommendations. But what we're recommending is strong consideration of investments that ultimately are designed to save us money in many ways. One way is to put the money to use because we have excess general fund reserves. When you add the 54 and the 2.7 and you divide by the amount of revenue we have, we're at 81%. So in aggregate, our revenues, our reserves for the general fund are about 80% right now. Your policy is 20%. So there's a lot of excess fund balance. Now, some of that's committed, some of that's assigned. And what we're talking about here today is only the unassigned portions of the unassigned fund balance. And with these investments, we still leave millions and millions of dollars aside that are not they're not designated for any purpose. They could be used for any public purpose still on both the general fund and the Measure U reserves. So let me walk through this list because the first $3 million relates to accelerating investments in our streets. And I know we all heard about potholes this spring. So this is a bit of a nod to addressing the conditions of our streets. And you did receive a presentation from our Director of Public Works recently that indicated that a recent analysis of our streets indicates that we have a $49 million deficit on the investment side of our streets. And the longer we wait for streets, the more expensive they become to repair. Remember, the chip seal overlay is the $150 a mile. The overlay is about $550 a mile, and the rebuild is $1.1 to $1.6 million a mile. So we don't want to spend 1.1 to 1.6. It's almost like replacing a library chiller before it breaks, right? We don't want to spend that extra money that we don't need to. Same idea here with the streets. This is an incremental use of surplus funds to invest another $2 million on top of the investments that we're continuing to make as we did this past year. I mentioned earlier that the Auto Mall is our economic engine. I haven't been here every year for the last 20 plus years, 25 years since this was built, but I'm pretty sure that the city has not invested significantly in the Auto Mall. In fact, portions of the Auto Mall have to be completely rebuilt. Some of the streets have deteriorated that much. They can't, an overlay isn't enough. We have to rebuild sections of the street. The estimate to pave the Auto Mall correctly is approximately $1 million. As the economic engine of the city and with all those new houses out in Winchester and Menifee that I'm watching go up, I'd love to make sure that they know how to wander right down to the Hemet Auto Mall. We'll even drop some pebbles along the way. They don't have their own auto dealers in Menifee, and we'd like to provide service to them. So the idea here is let's make sure that the economic engine of the city is well taken care of, and also that we accelerate our investment in our local streets and begin to catch up on the significant backlog on investments. The third item here, Safe and Clean Streets Initiative. I'm going to be meeting soon with the mayor.
Can we
Yes.
hold up a minute
Sure.
and go back to the streets? Now, we have a CIP already for 5 years of street maintenance. So this is on top of the street the CIPs.
Right. Essentially, this is close to, it's a little under what we would, a little under the annual investment. So it provides an opportunity to almost accelerate everything by a year. So if we looked at year 2 on that CIP list, we could accelerate year 2. In fact, with a little bit extra, we could basically move everything up a year. There's going to be a point where we can't do everything in 1 year and shouldn't. So there's a limit to how much we could do, but
Top of the,
this is on
Yeah.
top of what's in year 1.
okay.
This would
thank you.
be essentially moving year 2 a little faster, but we're going to be working on developing a chart that will recommend to you some streets that would be suitable for this accelerated, for accelerated investment. And what we'd like to do, which we haven't done yet, is use some software that helps us prioritize investments and stretch that public dollar.
Okay, will any of the TUMP fees and the Measure A fees be included with this, or will assist with this, with these funds going into the streets?
This is over and above all the existing investments.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And you could grow this number. So for example, the 2 million, you could grow that higher. You could reduce it. These are discretionary decisions on your part. This is a recommendation from staff. So an additional $3 million toward our paving and our economic engine. On the Safe and Clean Streets initiative, this is work that the police chief, the fire chief, the director of public works, myself, and the city attorney have been working on, and our staff. And we're going to be presenting some recommendations to the ad hoc of the mayor and the mayor pro tem as early as next week, likely next week. The draft is in my hands now, and I'll be working on that between now and our meeting. And then we're envisioning a workshop where we'll talk about what this consists of and receive some additional council feedback on the ideas before we consider moving forward on it. This is a placeholder number for now, but essentially a cornerstone of this effort is to make sure that, cornerstone of this effort is to take steps to increase the safety of our community, as well as the cleanliness and appearance of our community. So that means adjusting service levels within the police department, and also adjusting service levels with respect to our commercial corridors. So today we know that street sweeping occurs every 2 weeks. We know that Caltrans is responsible for carts along the edges of Highway 74. That's not necessarily a level of service that works for us, because the vision here is daily patrols. And we're working on, is that a partnership with others? Is that something we take on ourselves? Are there other strategies, and marrying it all together? But the idea behind this is bringing forward an initiative that would lead to daily patrols 7 days a week, use of one-time money. So this is a surge on cleaning up our town, and then also deploying complementary programs that we'll walk through here in a second, and also on the Measure U side. But this is a bit of a placeholder until we flesh out that effort. And again, these will ultimately, you will have the control over how much we invest toward these efforts.
This will include the prostitutes that walked up and down Florida?
That's part of safety, right? So this is an effort, and that's why we're gonna look forward to meeting with you and sharing our concepts and receiving feedback on those. When I speak to beautification, there are a couple of elements here. Citywide Facade Improvement Program, macro. This is more of your larger shopping center. So we do have a couple of shopping centers that have that would be considered distressed. That in some cities, programs like this, methodology can change from city to city, but the one that was most interesting to me was one that put the property owner in for 1/3 of the cost, and the city in for 2/3 to encourage an investment, to make sure that the investment happened. And then what happens is the facility goes through a remodel or a reskinning and reinvestment, and it looks brand new after it's done. So you've seen this happen in different locations. I think we've even had one on the north side of Florida near Sanderson in recent years. So there's a micro version here too, where smaller properties would be eligible. We need to build the criteria for this program. So this is not something that would be available on July 1. We would need to build the program, develop criteria, develop a process for approval. I was speaking with, I think, the mayor and the mayor pro tem about this recently, and I indicated that there would likely be some council review of some of this before movement would move forward on a recommendation, but we would need to develop this program. The pension 115 trust contribution, we're ultimately recommending an increase. This current year, you've invested $500,000 in a pension 115 trust. It's an investment that allows us to be slightly more aggressive on trying to earn money on the 500,000 that was allocated to that. We're recommending to grow that by an additional 500,000 this year. So a $1 million investment, 500 plus 500 additional this year. This money, if hypothetically CalPERS lost money and the cost of the city went up, or CalPERS reduced their discount rate, this is a source of funding that would help us during that tough time while that bubble of extra costs move through the system. So today we have approximately 500,000, and tomorrow it would be north of 1.5 million with that type of investment. It's an effort at trying to sustain our commitment to staffing and service levels through a recession or through costs that would come via the pension side of the house. Question.
You're recommending us to add another 500,000? What's this 280 for?
280 is the Measure U, is the general fund portion of this. I think there's a complementary Measure U number that's actually not in the next slide, but would be married with the general fund. So some of it would come from general fund reserves, some would come from Measure U.
So the 280 will come from the general, and then it'll be matched with the Measure U?
Right.
For the total 500.
Right. So we are already paying $21 million, right, toward OPEB and PERS. And this is where we would be taking a portion, setting it aside, almost like a rainy day fund. If those numbers went up by $3 million next year, hypothetically, a year from now, this would mean that we'd have 1.5 million of that covered. And instead of having to come up with $3 million in a single year, we would have $1.5 million to draw upon if we wanted to. We could also choose to invest it and reduce expenditures. So we'll have a lot of different options on how we address that challenge. But this is an effort to set aside money and prepare for a rainy day.
You're saying there's already $1 million in there.
There's a
And-
500,000.
Okay, so there's 500, and we're gonna bring it up to $1 million.
You would add an extra $1 million this year, so you would bring it up to 1.5 million.
And that's,
And some cities have been at this for a while, right? Sometimes they'll take their general fund surplus, and let's say they have a policy that says we'll take half of the 2.7 and we'll roll half of the half of any surplus that we have in a annual given year, we would roll half of it into a pension 115 trust. So there are practices like this that occur in different cities. Sometimes they pre-fund it during their budget process, like this concept. And some cities have been doing this for a number of years. And Paul, I think, wants to elaborate on this.
If I may, some years ago, PERS had, I'm a little squishy on this, but PERS had highly recommended or mandated that cities pre-fund this obligation, which means I have to write a check to PERS for pre-funding this obligation. That's money out of my pocket. I can't invest that. I can't earn money on that. PERS gave the option to cities to open up a 115 trust, which means this money would go into trust. The city would have fiduciary ownership of that, but it's to be used for pension obligations should the need arise. But because I have a fiduciary ownership of that money, it's still in my control and I can invest it. However, it's earmarked for the prepayment, but it's still in my control. So what we're doing is rather than giving writing PERS a big check when they can take that money and invest it, I get to put it into a 115 trust and I get to earn money and invest it. And that money comes back to the city. Am I answering your question, Councilman? Thank you.
It's our money and we have control over it in terms of when we want to use it. So we can continue to let it build up and earn money, or we could deploy those resources if there was a need at a particular time.
Who determines when you use it?
Council decides.
I'm sorry?
The council decides. Yeah. The next item here is something that I think the more I spend time on our commercial corridors, the more I'm convinced that this is an opportunity for us. I call it a trash enclosure pilot program, but we have a number of trash enclosures. Many of them predate 1990, when trash was in a single container, right? So recycling and trash went together in some of these commercial bins, and one trash truck came and picked everything up. Today, some of those pre-1990 trash enclosures are still peppered around the city, and there's not room for the recycling bin that's mandated by the state. And so it sits in a parking lot. And what does that mean? It's an attractive nuisance. It attracts scavenging. It attracts scavenging. It attracts graffiti. Some of our enclosures are not locked. They're simply block walls with an area for a bin. And what's happened in some cases is people have decided to live there and they've moved the bins out. But there are good examples in town of really beautiful trash enclosures where it includes a top on top and a locked gate in front. And it's a deterrent to someone that would be scavenging. No one can sleep there. You can't reach the bin to add graffiti. It helps save CR&R money because they have a responsibility to deliver clean bins, sightly bins to us. And so I called CR&R up and said, if the city was willing to invest money in a trash enclosure pilot project, would you be willing to help us in some way? And the answer to that question was yes. And they have offered to match our 226 with about $24,000, which would lead to a investment of $250,000. We would need to develop criteria on how we deploy a program like this. But our estimate is the average trash enclosure, maybe $20,000. This investment then would lead to somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 additional enclosures. We could grow that, and CR&R has indicated that should we double our investment, they would contribute $50,000. So yes, Mayor.
When you build these, you can't use chain link fence because somebody used chain link fence and they cut right through it. You have to use wrought iron or something that will keep them from penetrating it. So
That's
just
right.
to let you know.
That's right.
Thank
Yes,
you.
we would have to develop criteria on what type of structure would be suitable and eligible. And the idea here is it would be city money and CR&R money that would fund the projects. But a good example of that is we had a number of staff that worked together in mid-April, and we sat in a room and talked about what are some opportunities. And this was discussed as an opportunity, and the city attorney, one of the observations that the city attorney made was our code doesn't allow us to take in, if we needed to grow a trash enclosure from one bin to accommodate 2 bins or 3 bins, the code doesn't allow us to take a parking space in that parking lot. It's a liquor store. It's the northeast corner. But that is a perfect example of what could happen here. We could move a wall, take a spot or two, build a trash enclosure on top, remove an unsightly bin scenario example, remove the opportunity for scavenging and graffiti. But today we can't facilitate that without a code amendment. So we are already working on developing language that we would recommend to you that would provide an exception for taking a parking space or 2 to accommodate the state law on recycling. And so that's an example of how the city attorney's office and other staff are working together to help support the delivery of some of these initiatives. Um, the professional services community engagement is a combination of a couple of concepts where one, there's a software product that I'm going to be interested in sharing with you as a concept to enhance communication. It's similar to developing videos that can answer questions for the community. It's a startup company. And I'm intrigued by the idea because I think it can save time and also enhance understanding on the community's part. But we'll look forward to feedback on that concept. That's about a $24,000 investment. And then also setting aside some additional funds for outreach in our community on a lot of different fronts. And then some additional funds for City Hall. It's an aging facility, and we do have some areas within the building that could use some attention. So there's some one-time investments recommended here. So this is a summary of $4.5 million of investments. It's part of the 8 million, and it's the general fund side. We're going to now take a look at the Measure U side, unless you have more questions on this. So the Measure U one-time uses would total 3.5. And for these, because these are primarily, they are all police and fire, I'm going to ask our police chief and our fire chief to come through and speak to these. I will say on the first one here, CityNet, this is a service that today is funded with ARPA dollars, and those ARPA dollars are going to run out. And so they're not a sustainable investment. This is also a discretionary investment, but the feedback that we're receiving from the county professionals, from the city net folks, and experiences in other cities like San Jacinto and Paris are positive, and we see opportunities to further develop the relationship with Paris and San Jacinto. But the concept here is to transition the funding source from ARPA to Measure U. And I know the mayor has a question.
So real quick, on the previous chart, you have $500,000 in Safe and Clean Streets Initiative, and that who is going to be, what group is this doing the Safe and Clean Streets Initiative? Is that our police officers?
This is undetermined at this point. So it could be equipment to, for example, to help with faster graffiti abatement.
Okay, wouldn't
This
that
could-
all fall under Measure U? Wouldn't this be under this next one?
It can likely, there are probably opportunities to move it either Measure U or this one. So what we can do when we sit down with the ad hoc, with the mayor and the mayor pro tem, is receive your feedback on
Okay,
if we had a list of potential expenses or investments, would you recommend they be funded out of the general fund reserve or the Measure U reserve?
thank you.
And Chief, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. As the city manager mentioned, these are budget requests, and these are from the Measure U fund balance. I know you're familiar with that. We had a extraordinary amount of Measure U fund balance that we have used for one time. So these are one-time costs, and as discussed, the professional service for CityNet, this is in hopes to increase that to 7 days a week. Now that was funded by ARPA funds. I know the value of it. They have wraparound services. So out of our police Measure U fund balance, I would like to use that to continue that service for the following 12 months. Second item is the 8 vehicles. There's an increase of 8 police officers to include. We still have vehicles that are over 15 years old that we need to make sure that we could continue our service. So that's including the request, one-time request regarding Measure U fund balance. The rescue vehicle, we are a regional team here in the Valley. We have an MOU and a collaborative agreement with Menifee and Marietta. We've had that since 1998. We have an obligation to assist in having that equipment there. Currently, our vehicle's at towards the end of life at 15 years. This rescue vehicle, it takes about a year to build. And that's why you see that cost right there at $370,000. The following item is to restore our vehicle equipment replacement fund. Now, our goal here is not to come back and do these one-time funds. Years ago, after we had the recession, we stopped replenishing our vehicle replacement funds. We were able to make it for about 10 years before purchasing a vehicle. Now, my goal is we're not going to come back in a year or two to ask for a certain amount, like 6 vehicles. We should be asking for 1, 2 every couple years. And this should be coming from a vehicle replacement fund. So we want to replenish that and start adding to it so we're sustainable moving forward. The last one is our real-time crime center. And this is going to be part of our Clean Streets initiative. And this is a service contract for 24 months, just like our flock cameras, which are our ALPR cameras. And this is to set these cameras up. These are community cameras that we could control in our real crime center and be able to watch it live and control those cameras in the areas that we have high crime, areas that we're having issues. So this is part of that Clean Street initiative using one-time fund balance that I have in our Measure U. That being said, I'll have Chief Sell provide information on the fire side.
Can we ask questions on this first or?
Yes.
Okay. You know, you probably know how I feel about CityNet. But they're going from a 5-day work period from 8 to 5 to a 7-day work period.
This is what
With
our
this,
intention is. Yeah, or to continue the service, but my intention is to increase it as well.
well, according to what my understanding is, we pay 1.5 now, or for this contract we're in now, and they only work from 8 to 5 days a week, which is to me superfluous because we have more crime at night. We have more crime on the weekend. That's why I didn't like the idea of having CityNet here, because we only have them from 8 to 5. So criminals don't work from 8 to 5. They work from 5 till 5 in the morning. And to have CityNet here when the criminals are out in the streets doesn't do us any good. So is this going to extend their hours or their days, or is it just the same? Are these the same hours that they're on now?
Okay, let me explain. The initial contract that was 1.3 million was for 19 months.
Or was what?
For 19 months. So it went a year and a half plus the month. And they're not out there to chase criminals. We do that. Our hopes is to find wraparound service for those that are homeless. That's what CityNet does. And we're in hopes to extend that program. So having 2 CityNet representatives to cover 7 days a week, also an overlap time. So it is going to be during certain time hours where they're out there. They're able to handle this themselves. I don't want them out there in the middle of the night. They should be out there at the times that they're more productive and able to do what they're doing. They just go out there, build those relationships, get those wraparound services for those individuals. If there's any issues with crime, we'll handle that on that note, but it is a time frame. Their time frame is from 7 in the morning, I believe, till 4. And we're looking towards 7 days a week.
Well, that'll help during the weekends.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of respect for you. So if you're going to use your money on this from Measure U, then I'll be fine with it. It's just using general fund money. And to me, it's a waste. But when we have the county sending homeless people here on a daily basis with vouchers, how can CityNet really be productive with all these people coming in daily? So to me, it's just, it's just, we're going in circles. We're a dog chasing our tail, in other words.
No, and I understand the concerns, and it's difficult working with the county because we need to collaborate with other services other than the county when we're talking about the weekend, because on the weekends, we're not going to get assistance from the county. But CityNet has built rapport with other entities to be able to find locations, find wraparound services that we could get taken care of.
Okay.
But the thing too is, when we've had officers out there that handled our homelessness, and we still do, but it's creating that time and relationship, which the CityNet folks do. They actually create that time, they build that relationship, and they're able to convince or build that relationship to get these certain individuals that want to get out of homelessness. And that's the time. If we have an officer out there that'll give their time, something happens where a critical incident comes out, unfortunately, they're going to leave and they'll say, I'll come back and talk to you later. These are their whole purpose is to sit down with these individuals, build that relationship, and to help them find some wraparound service. Let's get them out of homelessness. And that's the whole goal. Now, that's going to save time, personnel time, from my officers spending that time on this, where it's not going to be worth the while or worth the end result, what we're trying to do. Our officers are still out there working with them. We're building those relationships. But I think it's valuable to have some type of service out there that we're looking to help provide shelter for these individuals. So that's our goal. And I think this is very beneficial. If we have Measure U fund balance and we have it there, I think this is a good use of that fund balance.
Yeah. See, I believe that nonprofits are a better resource for that. We have a lot of nonprofits in our valley that also have homes or not sanctuary, but places for homeless to go to up in Idlewild. They have ranches out there. And I just I felt that nonprofits are a better resource for this, and it would probably be better to put our money into the nonprofits, let them work out, help the people and get them in their homes. But we'll go this route. We'll see what happens. But to me, when I make a call to CityNet and I don't get a call back from anybody, it kind of upsets me when here I'm trying to help somebody get off the street. They're ready to get off the street, and I have to tell. And you're also, when Lieutenant Dixon was on the force, he helped a lot because I would just call him, then he would call CityNet, and then they would come. But when I make a direct call to CityNet, I don't get any response.
Mayor, you can call me anytime, day or night.
Yeah, I
I
know.
offer you that up. If there's an issue, call me. I'll make sure that we get in touch with CityNet.
Okay.
They're aware of any issues. In fact, they're aware if the mayor or any council members or anybody in the public gives you guys or you give them a call, that there needs to be a response.
Okay.
So if there's any issues, please let me know. I mean, we pay a service for on this contract, and we want to make sure that we're out there providing that service. And I agree too, nonprofits are great, and they build that relationship with those nonprofits.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to do. And I think this is going to be a step as we talk about that Clean Street Initiative. There's a lot of different moving parts. It's going to be personnel. It's going to be nonprofits. It's going to be the council. It's going to be each district. It's going to be the community that gets together that we resolve and find solutions for this. This is just a part of it.
Right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Chief, what is your opinion on cameras at our intersections for people who run lights?
Well, that's been used and tried, and it's hasn't been successful in recuperating funding for that. In fact, that was an issue that came up several years ago. Most cities, larger cities that could afford to do that, instituted that application, but none of them in Riverside County or other areas. It's difficult to find them.
I thought the state deemed that unlawful. They didn't.
No, the issue I think was more of there's a registered owner to the license plate. Can you for sure designate that driver was that registered owner? And if there was any argument of that driver saying I wasn't driving my car, I mean, that's where you saw the issues that arose during those camera lights that we had or some cities had instituted. Now, if there's any other laws that came up in the recent past, any legislation, I haven't heard of it. We're worried about some other difficult legislation that's we're seeing coming down from the state on a yearly basis. That's not one of them that's has been too concerning, although traffic has been a concern with everybody, every city for the state since COVID, and we're all aware of that. So
Thank you, sir.
thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, council members, members of the community. So our first item is much like the police department, and we can see it's the vehicles, it's restoring the vehicle equipment replacement fund. So last year, I actually came before you with the needs assessment report that identified the fact that most of our fleet in the Hemet Fire Department had already exceeded its service life. And so we did not at the time have the vehicle replacement fund. So this now, much like PD, is making sure that we're sustainable and we have that vehicle replacement fund so we can stay ahead of purchasing fire apparatus that's much needed. So because of the support of the council and the community, we were able to put engine 1 in service last year. And we were also able to order 2 additional fire engines that are going to be coming. Unfortunately, because of the supply chain issues, they were supposed to come this summer. That's been pushed back for a full year. So again, we're going to be working with our partners in Public Works and Fleet Services to make sure that our emergency vehicles are kept up to date. But that much is what that first item is for. The second item is for Station 2 fence. So Station 2 on Stetson and Palm, if you can picture it in your mind, there is actually no security at all to anywhere around that fire station. And so, in fact, we had a recent break-in attempt of firefighters' vehicles while they were on duty. And thankfully, nothing was stolen, but our police partners are doing extended patrols, but that's going to enable them to actually have fencing around the fire station. The next item is Covell. So building and security technology upgrades. Now that we have the Department of Life Safety and we truly want to have that good customer service experience, but we also want to make sure that our employees feel safe at work. So this is actually to upgrade the counter, make sure that we have adequate doors, adequate protection. You know, we obviously live in a time of active shooter events and different things that we want to be mindful of. So that's going to be a very important thing that we do.
The prepaid warranty on the Motorola's year 3. This is one of those changes in accounting methodology. This is a result of an auditor finding. What we had done is our first year, we had entered into a warranty to buy these to cover our Motorola radios, communication devices for fire. GAAP, which is generally accepted accounting principles, which is my Bible, if you will. It tells me what I need to do and not need to do in reporting through my ACRA, formerly known as the CAPR. But those regulations require that if I buy an item that exists over a certain period of time and it's a service, that I amortize that item year after year. Because of that, I can't expense it in 1 year. You guys with me so far? So what I have to do is set that up as an asset and then amortize it year after year. This is the 3rd year of that amortization, and that's the $15,900.
These are on the new system that we just bought them in 2020.
I believe it is the warranty for those, but is that about right, Chief? Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Under 683, is that a dollar for dollar replacement for the money that was taken above?
I believe it is.
So I just want to augment the chief's comments about the 683,000.
I can't hear you. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I want to augment Chief Sell's comments about the $683,000. It's my understanding that $683,000 was removed from the fire equipment replacement fund a couple of years ago to help balance the budget. My memory is 2019, but I could be off. But what we're attempting to do here is restore dollars that were used previously to balance a budget that used to be in that replacement fund. It's okay from time to time when there's a challenging budget to consider use of other sources. This is an effort to put us back on track with not having to have a significant financial challenge confront us, but to be prepared for a more normal equipment replacement cycle. Are there any questions for the fire chief related to any of the items here?
I do, but I'll get in trouble.
Okay. The next slide is one that I've enjoyed sharing over the years because I think it's helpful to understand what are the growing costs on an organization's budget. So what we did here was organize from high to low cost drivers for the budget, and we were really targeting anything above $50,000. So this is a list of expenditure cost drivers. I want to address a few of these. So the July 1, 2023 MOU adjustments, these are cost of living adjustments that are agreed to in our memorandums with our labor groups. This 3% increase translates to a $634,000 increase of general fund expenditures for the next year. That $500,000 that we referred to in the pension 115 trust, that's another, in this case, I'm viewing that as an investment. At some point, we're going to need to make these payments. This is setting aside money for a bit of a rainy day on top of the existing $500,000 that we've already built into the budget. The third line item here, we're going to cover on the next slide, but these are a number of position changes. In some cases, we're exchanging one FTE, an existing FTE, for a different FTE. And I'm going to walk you through all of those changes, but it's easy to misinterpret the next slide, which is why we're talking about it today. The other items I want to point out, the OPEB costs, these are city related pension, post-employment benefit pension costs, $346,000. The increase to the PERS UAL, the 181, that's the general fund portion of that, lower than it has been in the past, so that's good news. You notice on the animal services item, the 282,000 has an asterisk. That's, and I think I've provided you information on this. This is a placeholder. What we today we have a contract with Ramona Animal Care for approximately $420,000, and we understand that they're discontinuing services soon at the end of the fiscal year. And Chief Poost has been in contact with the county exploring options for animal services, and recently we sat down to talk to them and receive their proposal. And the proposal came in significantly higher than the $600,000 that we had set aside in the budget, thinking that 600 was a pretty good number. And in fact, the lowest price option was 1.3 million, north of 1.3 million. So we're still noodling on options. We're going to be having conversations with neighbors and talking about alternatives, and then working also with the county. They're a good interim solution should we need one, or they may be the long-term solution, but it's still in development, and we're going to be working hard over the next 4 weeks for to try to land on a number that we have some confidence in. But we anticipate that this number could increase, and that means that we're going to need to solve for somewhere between $0 and $700,000, because that was a late breaking development as we were putting together the draft budget. Just looking at the others here. There are some positions that were added at mid-year in other departments like Public Works and one position in planning, an associate planner. Those positions are being included into the budget. So they're not itemized here because they were part of the current year budget, but they have not been positions that we have filled yet. So the appropriation's been made, the FTE has been authorized. We haven't completed the recruitment process for those positions. Are there any questions about some of these expense cost drivers? Mayor, if you have any questions about any of these expenditure cost drivers, happy to answer those or proceed to the next slide. So I indicated that we would break down on line item 3 here, the citywide position changes itemized on the next slide. So this is a breakdown. And we're first going to talk about the left column, and then we'll be talking about the right column, which is some of the reductions. The additions are on the left. So we've talked about the 8 police officer positions. 6 of those are going to be city funded. 2 will be Hemet Unified School District funded. But these are cost drivers on the budget that we're itemizing for your awareness. The there are a couple of positions that are the same FTE, but we're recommending a change in title and their level of responsibility. So the economic development manager position is one that I'm recommending we change the existing vacant economic development analyst position, which is in the community development department, and change that to an economic development manager, someone that would be a bit more independent, have a bit more experience, navigate the relationship between planning, community development, and public works engineering, and help facilitate not only efforts at developing additional revenue through economic development strategies. And one of their first jobs is going to be to develop, in partnership with myself and council members, an economic development strategy. But that person would be a liaison between planning, public works, and the city manager's office to help finesse some of these development projects that are moving forward. Secondly, the deputy public works director position / assistant city engineer. Today we have one licensed city engineer that has to sign off on plans, and for several months now we have been recruiting for 2 principal engineers that are authorized in the budget. We've had a challenge finding a candidate for either of the 2 positions, and it's not surprising to me because I think in many cities engineers start at a younger age, they move up, they're promoted, and they're often promoted through the principal engineer position. And it's more comfortable for them likely to stay within the same organization. We're more likely to find a candidate by a different position, like a deputy public works director who's already had years of senior or principal engineer experience, which means they start off on the ground running. But it's also very important for us to make sure that we create a leadership opportunities in our department where there's a ladder, so that we're avoiding a situation where, heaven forbid, we lose a director and we need to then wait 6 months, 4 to 6 months for a recruitment process to end, to go through its steps and then land. We would have some continuity of operations that we build in. So it's a big lesson learned in my career. We have a bit of a void here right now in the public works department. This is a way of taking an existing principal engineer vacancy, turning it into a position that would assist us in a couple of different ways, because this person would also be assigned to development engineering, and again, finesse projects that need that engineering stamp and review, and free up our director in other ways, but also, for mentorship for this person as well. We're very fortunate with the performance of the revenue to be able to support the delivery of some augmentation to our police department, both on the sworn and the non-sworn side. And then on the right side here, I want to direct your attention to a couple of positions because it's easy to misunderstand what these are. And for the firefighter references here, the $146,000. Right now, the draft budget is making an assumption that we need some clarification from FEMA on, and it relates to the SAFER grant. We have 15 positions that are covered that are included in the SAFER grant. And the vision when this grant was drafted was that there were 4 people per shift would be assigned to the ladder truck. The leadership of the fire department believes that we can operate that with 3 and dedicate the 4th person to help support delivery of the squad. Today, the squad is located at Station 1. When the ladder truck is fully staffed and we relocate it from Station 4 to Station 1, the squad would deploy to Station 3 to help with call volume there. The SAFER grant, if FEMA says yes to this request, which we do need to hear back from them on, this would save us about $450,000. And we're hopeful that they will say yes. Because otherwise what that means, if the answer is no, and that's not allowed, then we're going to need to find another $450,000 of solutions to bring this budget into balance. And we'll need to talk about those at a later date. But I wanted to make sure that the council understood that. When we started planning this, when we started conceptualizing the budget for 23-24, it was my hope that we could also significantly augment our planning efforts, slightly pay for it with, reducing our investment in consulting staff that we send plans out to, receive comments, come back, and we can still further analyze the cost differential between sending it out to a consultant versus having that person in-house. But for purposes of balancing the budget at the moment, the vision was 1 additional associate planner, 2 additional principal planners. We've set that aside for now, and an additional position that appears not to be able to be fully funded under the current constraints of the budget, is unless we change investments, would be the assistant to the city manager position, which is vacant today. So, of course, I would enjoy having some additional help, and at the same time, I know that different departments need investments as well. So right now, this is something that would be that was initially part of a request that we're choosing not to fund, but it's a placeholder for now, and we will continue to further analyze and refine numbers between now and when we present the formal budget to you. Do you have questions about any of these expense drivers?
Go ahead, Jackie.
I see there's 3 community services officers. Can you describe the responsibilities of that position?
I'm going to invite our police chief to talk to you about how the non-sworn staff are being used in different ways today.
Yes, Councilmember Peterson, great question. Our community service officers do everything that a police officer does. They take reports. The things that they don't do, they don't make arrests. They don't carry firearms. And they go out there. What it does is relieve our officers that actually do handle calls that a police officer should be handling. So it frees up the time. And I think for the past 8 years, we've increased it. Our personnel, I think at one time we had about 4. With this increase, we should have an approximately amount of 12, which we could relieve different patrol shifts to make sure that our officers are out there in the street and, in the presence of the public. All right.
Can I ask a follow-up on that? Because I think I missed it. These are non-sworn, so as far as PERS is concerned, they're at a lower rate, the
Yes.
CSO office.
Yes, these are non-sworn. Most of our professional staff, as I refer them to professional staff or non-sworn, are not on the sworn PERS liability.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
What was the cost on the squad that you said that we weren't quite sure of? What was that cost at?
The squad consists of 6 positions today. And so right now we have 3 vacancies. It's essentially those 3 vacancies that this would fill. So we would be able to take SAFER grant money and drop them into the 3 existing vacancies and essentially stretch the SAFER grant dollars by $450,000 extra, because it would allow us to put 3 people onto 3 of the 6 slots on the squad. The other 3 members of the squad that are dedicated today, we have 3 people that have leave for different reasons. And so this would allow the squad to be fully staffed with regular employees.
Okay, let me
And essentially half of the squad would be funded by the SAFER grant under that scenario. Am I accurate, Chief?
my question is that we, on the previous page on their restore of vehicles and equipment replacement fund, we gave them $683,300. Why couldn't we have just gave them 233,200 or yeah, 233,300, use the additional money to fund that squad? I mean, why would we have to give the whole amount back to them? I know we used it, but still,
So
just the question.
the distinction is we've built the budget, and I'm going to distinguish between the investment in restoring funds to the equipment replacement fund. I'm going to distinguish between that, which is a use of one-time money, from what we're talking about with a squad is recurring operational charges or expenses. And because they're recurring charges, we need to make sure that the revenues align with recurring revenue
Well,
can support the delivery
this
of that
would be a
service.
one-time use of this money because it's the fiscal year is almost over. We got to cover what, June, up to June 30th. So we give them 233,000 for their vehicle maintenance and then use the other portion for it to cover June's. That's a one-time spending. I mean, I don't know. That's,
I'm going to have Paul jump in on this real quick.
Hi, Mayor. Thanks for the question. Yeah, you have to look at it this way. Mark's getting it right. What we're trying to do in the lean years, when we had structural deficits, we were pulling up all the stops to try and balance our budget and pulling enough resources to get through that year. What we're trying to do now is use one-time surplus to replenish that which we borrowed. That's what we took. If we were to put that into salaries, into a squad, that loses its identity as one-time money and becomes an operational costs that we'll have to do year after year after year.
okay. So just trying to cover for the last month of the fiscal year is not a one-time cost.
Well, remember, if we do that, and we do cover the last month of the year, and we do hire, it doesn't really bode well for the city to hire a person for the last month of the year, because then that person will be there next year, and that's an ongoing operational cost.
All right. All right, then. I got it. Thank you. Go ahead, Jack.
I'm going to add one more issue and clarify this, because I think you may also be anticipating, well, the SAFER grant's here for 3 years. What happens if half of our squad is supported by the SAFER grant? That's a challenge for tomorrow, but it's in place for 3 years, and we would need to talk about how to fund 3 positions. This is why when I talk about the $69 million of revenue that we have, all of our efforts collectively need to support efforts to grow that revenue through our growth in our economy to $100 million or more as quickly as possible. We have some fantastic opportunities to grow revenue from the forthcoming hotel projects, further development on the residential side and the commercial side. Those additional resources will be helpful to helping to sustain and improve some of the service levels that we are providing today to the city. And the fire department is a department that's an interesting department, because the call volume is very significant, and it's increasing steadily each year as our population is increasing. And you know this, and with 5 stations, at some point we're going to need a 6th station to make sure that our response times are appropriate. And today we're a little slower, partly because we have 3 developments pretty far away, right, from where these stations are. One is McSweeney Farms, another is Four Seasons, another is Stony Mountain. These are long distances to travel, and sometimes if any one of our engines is on a call, and with the number of calls that we have, particularly at Station 1 here, we do 5,700 calls at Station 1. There's a good chance that that station's out on a call. That leaves 4 stations to cover the rest of the territory, and it's contributing to our response times. And so our focus is long-term, looking at how can we improve the response times and reduce the amount of time it takes us to get to individual calls for assistance on the fire department side. I think the chief wanted to augment some comments.
No, just briefly, I just wanted to thank everyone for their support. And this is truly what we're trying to do, is be collaborative in terms of the city manager's support, also staff, finance, labor management coming together, basically trying to find ways to make sure that we increase the capacity of the fire department by being mindful of the costs. So if we're able to get this, and I'll call it a victory with FEMA, that's going to enable us to fully staff that squad and also help to reduce overtime. So we're trying to do our part to add capacity. When we have that extra capacity, that means that those firefighter paramedics, they're also going to engage in community risk reduction activities and fire prevention, which is going to make this community safer, which again points right back to the strategic plan. So I just wanted to add those additional comments and thank you for your support.
Go ahead. Almost fell asleep.
Yeah. I'm going to change the subject and talk about the assistant to the city manager position.
Yes.
And while that looks good on paper for savings, we as a council need to recognize the toll that it takes on you. At this point, I think we're all in agreement. We don't want to lose you. New person on the block, he's okay. My question is, with hiring an economic development manager, will that person be able to relieve some of the time commitment that you have? And will some of these analyst positions also take some of the time burden off you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I do see synergies between the economic development manager, someone I've never had in any of the cities I've managed, but I have had assistant twos in all three of the cities and two of the cities I've managed. There are a lot of economic development opportunities in this city. And I really enjoy that type of work. And I know I can help our economic development manager or person like that help craft an economic strategy in partnership with the council that will yield results for the city. And I've had some recent casual conversations with the mayor about some interesting ideas. And I just know that there are some great opportunities there. And I think it will free up some of my time that otherwise would be invested in efforts like that. And I think at the same time, a manager position versus the analyst, I think the analyst is going to need more coaching. And the manager person would be someone that we hope would have some experience that can be more of a self-starter rather than be asked to research various opportunities, prepare reports, make a recommendation. So I'm looking for someone that has had several years of experience as an analyst. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a really impressive slide because I think it helps tell the story of where Hemet is financially. We're going to look at a couple of different colors here, but the 20% reserve on the general fund, that's your general fund reserve. And what we see between 2013 and 2017 is an overall decline in the revenue. And then after 17, with the assistance of the blue Measure U dollars, we've seen an economic recovery. This has been, how did this occur? It happened for a variety of reasons, right? Obviously the Measure U dollars, some of the dollars were probably underestimated, both on the yellow general fund revenue, particularly in 21 and 22, and also for 1920, getting started with Measure U, it was possible that the city underestimated its revenues. The city may have been also working to contain expenditures aggressively coming out of that hole that we found ourselves in, really in many ways dating back to the early 2010s and post Great Recession. But we've been digging ourselves out of a hole, and now we're in a much better financial position with about 80% reserves on our total operating revenue. So I think it's been a combination of conservative vesting, terrific performance on sales tax. When it's good, it's really good. And for an interesting, 21 was a very interesting year coming out of COVID. That first year, there was a lot of enthusiasm and the sales took off. Some of this could be a little bit related to inflation and more recent, the last 6 or 12 months. Some of the gas prices were very high. We happen to have selling gas is actually a fairly significant part of our revenue stream. So we receive sales tax related to that, and that's been a pretty healthy number. So when gas prices were really high, that was also contributing revenue to the city. They're still pretty high, so relatively speaking. So that's helping as well. So it's been a combination of economic performance, and it's likely been containing expenditures. And just in the last year, when you look at the numbers, my observation is we've had a lot of vacancies. So when we have vacancies, we expect them to be here all year. But if we lose people to retirement, and this is about, as we were coming out of 2017, that's sort of the, beginning of the end of the baby boomer generation that was moving through the workforce. So we did experience a lot of retirements, which led to a lot of recruitments. Today, as of this morning, I think we have 14 active recruitments. Does that include the 2 department directors? Okay, so 14 active recruitments right now. And I don't know what the numbers were over the last couple of years, but I imagine that you were actively recruiting for police officers in particular, trying to replace police officers that were retiring. And that was a factor as well. So this is something to celebrate in terms of the current condition of the general fund reserve. This is a graphical representation of it. And what you see is the general, I want to make sure that we talk about the 20% reserve. That number in that column should be married with the general fund left column. So those 2 numbers together equal the general fund reserve. But we're formally dedicating 20% of the general fund reserve aside for a rainy day, emergency, et cetera. That's what those numbers are. They're going to need to grow to keep pace with the new revenue. Moving from 63 million to 69 million is going to grow that 8.5 million. It's going to grow north of that to sustain the 20% investment. The Measure U fund balance began in 16-17 and accelerated a lot between 17-18 and 18-19, and has been growing at about 3 million and change since then. The real economic changes occurred on the general fund between 1920, 2021, and 21-22. Remarkable changes in general fund surplus, growing by $10 million a year. So that was very significant performance. And we're at 54 million today. When we add the 2.7 that we're forecasting, we'll be north of 56. We anticipate being north of $56 million on June 30th. Any questions about these numbers? This really leads us to a conversation about the council's 20% reserve requirement. Yes, sir.
We don't have a surplus in our general fund as a result of Measure U. The general fund developed its surplus on its own.
That's correct. There's a general fund surplus, and there's also a Measure U surplus. And there's an opportunity to put those dollars to work for the city. Now that we've, far exceeded the council's 20% reserve requirements, there's excess dollars sitting in an account. And with the current inflation rate and our earning potential on investments, some of that money is evaporating due to inflation if it's not put to streets or some other investment. So this chart is designed to break down the current fund balance, and on the right side, identify what those numbers would look like if your reserve requirement was a little higher. So what we've done is we've modeled a 25% reserve scenario and a 30% reserve scenario. The unassigned is what's left in the general fund or the Measure U reserves if you chose to increase the reserve requirements. So this is a choice for you. My recommendation is to grow this. The question is how much, and that's where it would be helpful to receive your feedback on whether you have any enthusiasm for growing these numbers, or whether you're comfortable with the 20% reserve. And I'm going to invite Paul to walk through the left column a little bit more.
So we just finished our 21-22 year-end audit. The numbers on our very left-hand column start with just under 50,000 and end with $54 million, reflect audited financial statements. So this is something we can definitely hang our hat on. That said, we calculate our 20% reserve requirement based on audited numbers, right? So we know they're accurate, and this is what we base it on. Based on this, we have spendable, non-spendable, restricted, committed, and non-committed, and assigned and unassigned. Of the $54 million, it's broken down accordingly. 21 million is unassigned. The assigned is 1.7 million. That's money that's spoken for. Earlier, I was talking about the Motorola's, the money we put aside for our Motorola amortization. That would be rolled up in part of this. Our Measure U, as of June 30 of 22, amounts to just south of $18 million. Now that's Measure U general fund revenue. We're carving it out so we can identify it and we can see it separately. Moving up, you have your restricted of 1.9, and then your non-spendable Measure U of $2 million. That's Measure U money that's been earmarked and is non-spendable. This is what makes up our fund balances. It is audited and it is opined on by our independent CPA firm. At this point, I'll take any questions, concerns, or comments you might have.
Say it one more time.
All right.
I'm
so,
5.
Say again.
Like I'm 5
Like on 5. You lost me.
years old.
Okay. Sure. So you have a paper route and you earn money. At the end of the month, you have $20 that you've earned from your paper route. Of that $20, you get to buy rubber bands to fold up your newspapers. This is how old I am. I remember this because I had a paper route. You've also got money that you spend on candy bars and bubblegum cards. All right. So during the course of the month, you earn $20. You have maybe $5 of expenditures on rubber bands, candy bars, and bubblegum cards, leaving me with $15 that I didn't spend. If for the 12 months of the year, I don't spend any of that money I have left over every month, at the end of the year, I'm going to have 15 times 12. I'm going to have $60. That's my reserve. That's my savings, right? That $54 million.
Right now we're above that.
Way above that. Right now, our savings is $54 million. Now, if we want to get technical and want to get a little
$54 million of money that hasn't been attached to anything.
correct. Well, some of it has been attached. Some of it, Councilman Peterson's absolutely right. Some of it has been earmarked. For example, that $54 million, it's not, we can't do whatever we want with it. Like if I wanted to take that $54 million and take 20 of it and put it into roads, streets, curbs, and gutters, I can't, because 17.8 million of that is spoken for Measure U. It can only go towards Measure U expenditures, allowable expenditures. So that money is committed. It's committed to a specific purpose. The assigned that we have is committed for, is assigned for a specific purpose. And that's kind of how that works. I don't want to go into more detail and confuse you, but so far so good.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's how this is broken down. We have more fund balance than we've had in quite a while, but it's helpful to remember some of that money is spoken for. We can't spend all of it. The amount we can spend that's unassigned that we can spend on our beautification project, our street projects, our auto mall. We're looking at using that unassigned number of $21.8 million.
So hypothetically speaking, let's say we said, let's do a 30 reserve. What would happen in the years where our sales tax isn't high?
Great question. The purpose of the reserve, in my other cities, we call that an economic stabilization fund. And the purpose of that is when times are rough, it's our rainy day fund. Let's say under one of Mark's doomsday scenarios, the discount rate on our PERS investments drops. Let's say we head into another recession, another housing market crash, God forbid, another COVID. These are things that impact us economically. It hampers my ability to bring in sales tax revenue, right? And we all know that the city is heavily dependent on sales taxes. So let's say something like that happens and we have our sales tax numbers drops like it did just a few years ago. What Mark is recommending, and I agree, is that we want to build up our general fund economic reserve. We want to do that for when those times happen, you as a city council will vote and allow us to use some of that money to pick up the shortfall for our drop in general fund revenues. So far, so good.
Having been there and experienced having to pull out of reserves and not having any more and having to lay people off, I am a big fan of savings accounts. And I, quite frankly, wouldn't have a problem taking this to 50% for reserves. But I think 30% is a wise move. And I really think we need to do that. It's not fun firing people.
You know, and as Mark pointed out, Mark and I are both relatively new to the city, but what we do is we bring our experience from other cities. And one of the things that, 30% is, it's a nice threshold. Yes, ma'am. If we're here next year, well, pretty sure Mark will be here next year. But next year, who knows, we may come back and say, hey, what are your thoughts on moving us up 40%? Times are good. If we are sitting on a bubble, all right, and I hate to say it, but maybe we're due. What's the next crash going to be? Well, that's at a time when we'll go and dip into that. If, for example, things continue to go well beyond our expectations, well, let's revisit this and let's talk about increasing it even more. Plus.
Okay. This next chart has been adjusted since you last saw it. We took some time today to talk with our employees and our labor leaders and receive some feedback. This is intended to provide some context to you for how we operate versus how others operate. But you have to take this with a grain of salt because there are a lot of different variables in play here. Not every city has the same number of fire stations. Each fire station has a cost to delivering service. Cities contract and don't contract for police and fire and other services. But I think there's some takeaways that we can look at here. The new column that we've added is on the right. It's the dollars for public safety per citizen. And so while we look at the numbers one way here on this chart, which is organized from high to low on percent of budget, and again, there are a lot of variables. So think of this as order of magnitude, not exact numbers. But when we look at it from an investment from public safety per citizen at 576, we're closer, there are 5 or so cities that have more dollars invested per citizen. Now, another takeaway is I think we all aspire to have the revenue of Palm Springs. Look at that number, $1,600, $1,610 per person invested on the public safety side. So Palm Springs is half the size of us, and they have a remarkable $232 million general fund budget. But I think another takeaway here is our per capita revenue is relatively low, and that includes Measure U. So absent Measure U, we would likely be the lowest. We're already either at the lowest or just above the lowest. So the numbers mean that unlike some cities who are operating in and around us, we have the 90,000 people that we have. Really, the budget numbers are similar to a city that's a little smaller than us, the revenue that we have available to us to deliver services. And yet we're a fairly large city. And on the median household income, this is 2021 data. Again, these numbers are lower than others. And it again means that sometimes the sales tax performance, for example, may not be the same in our city as it is in other cities. Other factors that are not even built into these numbers that influence revenue are is it a city near a freeway? a freeway presents an opportunity for some significant big box retail, picking up traffic from other communities that are traveling through. Imagine all the hotel room nights that are being taxed for a variety of these cities that are all near, a number of them that are near very significant highways. We don't have anywhere near the revenue on the hotel tax front that others have. So again, this is just context, and we provide it for information. Question?
Got a question. I noticed that percent of budget, we're at 79%. What happens if someone goes over budget? Does that number have a tendency to go up also?
If it depends on the department that would go over to budget. So if it was a safety related department, yes, that would mean that in that given year, the amount of money that we spent on public safety, let's say, was higher than the initial allocation was planned for. If it was a miscellaneous department like the library, then it would overstate essentially the spending on the non-safety side. So we would spend a little bit more than the 21% that is invested today in under the methodology.
Thank you.
Okay, next, second to final slide here is a list of our full-time employees summary by department. And what we've presented to you is the current year allocation, as well as the draft, I'd say draft, maybe not proposed. We'll bring you the formal budget recommendation after some feedback, but this is conceptually how it's laying out. And obviously the Measure U performance and the commitment we've made to invest in public safety is we're able to grow those investments in the 23-24 budget by augmenting both the sworn and the non-sworn police officer positions, several of those. And then I do want to point out the first asterisk there on the fire non-sworn, the growth from 8 to 22. That reflects primarily the relocation of the code enforcement building life safety folks that move from community development to the Department of Life and Safety this past year, in the current year. And you see the corresponding reduction under the community development line item. I think this was 10.5 positions. 10.5 positions. And then there are some additional increases on public works due to the 4.5 ARPA maintenance aid positions that are incorporated there. Any questions about the allocations?
Do you know how many people in public works are actually out there in the street?
Finance or Public Works, would you like to help with this? I can speak briefly about potholes, for example. Potholes in the past, we've had, I believe, maybe as many as 12 people working in streets, parks types of efforts. That number is 3 today, and we've built into the budget an investment to grow that to 6. So it moved from 3 to 6, and I'll let Noah elaborate on that.
Just pulling up my org chart.
There's only 3 people right now filling potholes.
In streets, we do collaborate. Sometimes storm drain helps streets, and then streets help storm drain. So we'll get up to like 6 people, but yes, it's very small. There are 3 people that would be out filling potholes. We also have some temporaries that are assisting, some ARPA maintenance aides. But yeah, it's a very small group.
Can you talk about why we don't use that when we fill the potholes, how we have the option of doing the hot stuff and the cold stuff?
We've been doing as much hot as we can, but the logistics is we have to go usually all the way to Fontana to pick it up in a 6-ton trailer, so we can then bring it back to the city and fill the hot mix.
And what's wrong with that? You sound like it's impossible, but
It's not. We've been doing it regularly.
Well,
but it definitely takes a lot more, effort and time to go and drive out to Fontana
I
and pick up the
mentioned, I think,
material.
Mark, that San Jacinto bought its own hot patch truck and they're able to fix streets without having to get bids and they get their potholes fixed faster and more,
I think we have kind of the same capabilities there. I'm not sure where they're getting their asphalt.
from us.
Sure it's they have the same issues as far as going and getting it or having it delivered if they're doing a bigger job, and we have the capability to do that too if we're doing a big job, but we don't have the people and the manpower to then man all that equipment and fix some of those streets that way.
Gotcha.
How long do you anticipate having the 4.5 ARPA maintenance people?
As long as possible. I know there's that would be probably a question for maybe Veronica or someone that would know the funding that's available there through ARPA, but we'll keep using, the part-timers as long as the funding is available.
Got a question. At the American Legion, we get these guys that have to do 20 hours, 10 hours, 40 hours instead of going to jail, they work off their hours. Can the city do that, or is there a liability in there?
Some cities choose to use people, even people that are in custody. And I've worked in a city where we used in custody inmates to do some brush clearing seasonally, and it worked very well.
And why aren't we doing it if it works very well?
We can, the new city manager can only tackle one item at a time, but this is something
thought you
that
could
I
multitask.
think
That's
can
what I
work
was
in
told.
different contexts. In this case, in this other city, it was brush clearance in a fire zone in and around a reservoir. And our staff worked collaboratively to supervise in partnership with the jailing facility, the individuals, but they were fantastic, provided some really good service.
Good.
So yes, it's an opportunity to augment staffing through partnerships like that.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Can I take that one step further and suggest that we look into a program such as that? And I know CAL FIRE has for many, 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 many years used the inmate camp out in Batista to do weed abatement and things like that. And unfortunately, all of these people have been released from custody. So they don't have any maintenance staff out there. And we ran into that with the Fairview Fire because as it crept closer to the Ramona Bowl, none of that stuff had been cleared before, or at least not this last year. But if we could implement a program like that, maybe it would, maybe we could encourage, and I know this is against state law, but I'm going to say it anyway. We could encourage some of our homeless people to work part-time.
Go ahead, Chief.
Yeah, and I said that.
So you guys bring up excellent points. And just to add a little context, so the state right now is facing a crisis when it comes to their wildland fire crews. And CAL FIRE is transitioning from inmate hand crews to paid hand crews, but that's not going to happen overnight. So I can tell you traditionally where Riverside County had multiple crews at each camp, Batista being the closest to Hemet, now they only have 2 crews, right? So certainly, like you said, that's going to be a big problem for local government fire departments. What we're looking at is part of, it's kind of breaking news, but we're kind of working on some innovative ideas where, for example, maybe we take some of the students from the Alessandro High School Pathway Program and offer part-time work where we actually show them job skills like weed abatement and things that are kind of in the public safety realm. So we are looking at some innovative things to do exactly that.
All right, getting to the final slide here. Today, we talked about a lot of different elements of our budget. And to wrap up, it would be helpful for us to receive some feedback on a few things that we've talked about. So with respect to the revenue, our assumptions are based on feedback from a sales tax advisor, HTL, as well as educated guesses on property tax. We have developed assumptions that are not as conservative as they could be in order to accommodate some anticipated expenditures, which means that we're going to need to carefully monitor, particularly the sales tax in the first couple of months. We also learned about the property tax in September. And so when the property tax numbers drop in September, it will either be good news or average news or something that we need to consider. But I think on the property tax front, we're probably pretty conservative. I think the sales tax numbers were moderately conservative. And Paul can augment some of that. But we're interested in further feedback on, we're essentially anticipating a slowdown on the sales tax. And I want to validate that you're comfortable with that, the staff's approach to that. And then we'll move into a different topic. And I think, Paul, you want to augment some comments?
Mark's hitting it on the head. As we mentioned earlier, when we went our sales tax consultant back in the fall, their projections were pretty healthy, pretty strong. January they were really strong, and then of course just last month they were starting to pull back on their projection. Property tax, on the other hand, is a pretty consistent revenue source. If you look around the city of Hemet and you see the development that's going in, all of the housing developments that are going in, most of those aren't even on the tax rolls that our consultant did their estimate on. So if you look at the property values in this area and this valley going up based on those developments, our hope is that we were conservative in our property tax estimate projection. And I'm hopeful that, the revenues that do come in will be even stronger than we had projected.
Any feedback on our comments related to the revenue assumptions?
So you guys are telling us that we have to think about being careful right now? Is that
So
safe?
I think in California municipal finance, it's always a good idea to be careful. And when we detect any, I'm going to use a term from the Napa days, slippage. Someone used to love that term. If we see some slippage in our revenue, we need to pull back on spending and begin to assess and prepare for that, because my experience is that the sooner we adjust and not wait and hope, the better we're going to be. I'd rather jump in early. That's been the lesson learned over 3 recessions. Let's adjust quickly when we see a change in the revenue.
So
Go ahead, finish.
So the slide that has the, like the choices of the 20% and the 30%, okay, so I think that's this is a really cool slide because it shows us being proactive, right? How do we also be proactive as far as things that are unexpected? I don't know if the right word is unexpected, but something like overtime. So if we're being told right now we should scale back on things or just kind of chill out or whatever, and start to, build up our reserves, how do we mitigate unexpected overspending? What are some things? Do we have things built in to make sure that we're not overspending, with overtime and maybe credit cards and other, are we looking at everything, or are we just looking at just the things that are just here?
One of the approaches I like to take on a budget is to bring a council a quarterly budget update on trends and make it a public document that we talk about at a public meeting, council meeting quarterly. So when we jump into the new fiscal year, what we're going to introduce is bringing you some data probably in the October timeframe on what's happening in the first quarter. Sometimes the revenues lag a little bit. So sales tax today, isn't it lagging a little more than it used to? A little bit. State changed some rules with how they distribute sales tax, and it lags a little bit, but we want to bring you quarterly updates so that you can see what's happening a little earlier. It also helps all of us, to both the council, the community, and the staff, to see these numbers. So if we find situations where there is excess overtime, for example, being used in a various department or something like that, it would present an opportunity for us to talk about how do we mitigate that earlier than later, right? So I think we have a lot of strategies that we could deploy depending on the circumstances of what's happening. So there's, I think what we have to watch for is both on the spending side, right? We have to be careful. And then on the revenue side, we have to be carefully monitoring the revenue performance, talking to peers, talking to advisors on what's happening, even talking to merchants about what are they experiencing. I mean, it's not a bad idea for us to gather the car dealers together literally almost monthly and give them a raw pep talk on let's sell some more cars, but also receive some feedback on what's happening in their world, because that's such an important revenue source for us. With respect to credit cards, we have to be careful to monitor usage of credit cards. Generally, every city will establish a limit per each card. My experience is that often with a credit card turnaround time of about 21, 22 days from bill to payment, sometimes a city will wait too long to get the receipt. So my lessons learned over the years are having high expectations for our staff. When there's a credit card transaction, the receipt needs to go back. If it's a city credit card, the receipt needs to go back to finance immediately. Within 24 hours is my expectation. And I don't know that I've fully conveyed my high expectations on credit cards, but receipts need to be received very quickly by finance so that we can review the document, review the transaction, make sure it's an authorized transaction. Also make sure that there are adequate resources to support the transaction, and then pay the bill so that we don't incur a late fee or interest charges. We shouldn't be experiencing interest charges, and we shouldn't be paying late fees.
Okay, right now we're at what, a 20% reserve, and you showed us the 25 and 30. And I agree with Councilmember Krupa. We need to up it substantially. I'd like to double it to 40% and maybe have something at the next agenda where we approve it. Because right now, we are in the positive. We do have the funds, but that bubble is going to burst pretty soon, and we don't know when. And when it does, we're going to be in trouble. So I'd like to see something at 40% at the next meeting if we could, or we can vote on it. And if that number is not right, just let me know now.
When we bring the budget forward to you, we can bring an update to the general fund reserve. But if you want to provide some specific feedback on that, did I hear 40?
Yeah, 40 would be good,
Okay.
doubling it.
Any other feedback from other council members on the 40 or another number?
The two versions, the 30 and the 40.
We
I
can
mean,
have a 30
we have the 30 here, but have the 30 in the comparison
Okay.
with the 40.
We can bring you 30 and 40, show you what the implications are. And then we literally when we adopt the policy, you can just tell us which number to fill in on the blank, right? With the city attorney's permission, we would be able to just add the number into the resolution that governs the investment decisions. Okay. So that takes care of the second bullet point here. I really should have included a third bullet point with respect to some of the one-time investments and your feedback on some of the concepts. I can take that slide back up here. But any general feedback on the concepts of utilizing some of the excess fund balance to invest those dollars in the city, both on the part of the general fund reserve, a lot of streets and beautification, cleanliness efforts, and on the public safety side, investments in staff and equipment, and a little bit in our buildings.
Still think the 500,000 should go to under Measure U.
On the safe and clean streets.
Since it's on safe and clean street initiatives.
Okay.
I do. Can I have a couple
Yeah.
questions? Actually, it's on slide 23, which is your city comparison of general fund and public safety budget. And Hemet percent of budget is 79%. Is that general fund percentage only?
Yes, that's also that's
for 23, 24.
that's the original budget, 66 million.
Okay, how do we bring that down to 72, where it's supposed to be, which is high?
Well, I had our staff model 72, for example, under the current methodology with the implementing resolution. It means that 72% of the non-general fund revenue is invested in directed to police and fire, and the remainder 28% invested to the non-police fire departments. But all of Measure U is allocated to police and fire, not 72-28. So it ends up growing that overall number to 79%. So I modeled just to look at it, just modeled what does the world look like in a 72-28 scenario for the entire city? And the answer is it would impact staff, active staff today. We couldn't transition that quickly without some people being exchanged for other people within the organization. So I think my recommendation would be, if we're looking at, if you're ever interested in something other than this methodology, it would likely be with future dollars. It would be easier to work with what happens when we grow from 69 million to 75 million. How would you want to allocate that $5 million? So you could make choices about that. But I think maybe it's something that today we couldn't implement overnight without pretty significant impacts to departments,
Okay.
particularly impacts to police and fire.
Okay.
Police being probably more impacted than fire.
So we can set a threshold then at whatever the amount that we have now, and anything over it, we can use for something different then. Is that correct?
We could talk about options on how you might consider doing that longer term. And I think, it's with the number of dollars that we have to figure out on the street side, I think while we have some one-time fund balance available, it's a nice investment to augment some of that. And right now we have the luxury of having some significant reserves. But I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to grow our economy longer term that helps support enhanced services across the board. But I think what you're asking about is, could we work, if we grow the revenue by $5 million, do we have to only spend it or invest it on police and fire? Could we use it for something else? And the answer is yes, it's general fund revenue, but we can have some policy to structure some policy conversations about that at a later time. I think it's, at this point for this budget, we're pretty far along in building out this budget. And the wrinkle here with the animal control is something that is almost an example of what you're talking about, where we have a $700,000 gift that we need to solve for. And are we going to reduce the investments in certain departments, or are we going to figure out how we fund that? We're hopeful that we can reduce the number and bring you a couple of other strategies that are not too impactful to the operation. But I'll admit that a $700,000 challenge with about a week and a half to go on our budget development was a big surprise, and it's going to be challenging to solve that quickly.
I have one more thing.
Nope, not good.
I know. Is there, well, I would like to see going forward, which will come in next in other budgets coming forward, the unintended, and I'm just going to say it, the unintended increase in costs of the Safer Ground that we were not aware of when we all voted for it, because things have come to light that I didn't know. And that all goes into the situation. And I know it will benefit the city, but I also want to know the absolute cost that we didn't necessarily know about when the presentation was made.
Okay, we can itemize some of those costs for you and bring that information to you. And in short, the grant doesn't pay for the adjustments, any compensation adjustments beyond July 1, 2023. It doesn't pay for overtime. And in order to implement the the grant, we need to change the classification for two people, two different, well, it's 6 positions total out of the 15. And there's a cost to changing 3 of them to captains and 3 of them, is it to engineers? So there's a cost to that, and we can itemize those numbers for you.
Yeah, I think we need to know our real costs associated with that.
Okay.
And I know we're drawing to a close, so let me just say one more thing. This is probably the best initial budget session we have had since I have been on council. And I want to thank you for absolutely being clear, for all of staff being here, department heads working on this. We have touched on things and answered questions today that the public has never heard from before. And I just want to commend all of you and thank you for this session. And I can only assume that the next few sessions are going to be equally as informative. So thank
Thank you
you.
very much.
Yeah, I concur.
Thank you for saying it like I was 5.
Oh. Oh. Are we ready?
We're done.
There being no further business, this meeting is adjourned to the next city council meeting on June 13th, 2023. Thank you for joining us today.